Greetings everyone, I am Dr. J. In anticipation of Halo Infinite's release and to celebrate the franchise's 20th anniversary, the multiplayer component was released as a beta. There's been a lot of commotion around this, and since I've spent a good chunk of the last year talking about the games in the Master Chief Collection, I figured I'd throw my hat into the ring. Right out the gates, the main thing that stood out was the fact that the multiplayer component was going to be free to play. The moment I heard that, I was honestly shocked, as it seemed odd to give the single-player component the premium $60 price tag, only to give us the ability to play the multiplayer without having to buy into it. Considering the number of hours I've clocked into the Master Chief Collection over the last couple of years, setting that price tag for the single-player component suggests to me that either Microsoft has a lot of faith in it, in spite of the co-op campaign not coming out until months after the official release, or they want to try and recreate the success they saw with ODST. That being said, from a business standpoint, this isn't necessarily a bad deal if you don't have any interest in the campaign. So far as I can tell, the only thing locked away within the progression system are cosmetics, though it is worth mentioning that it seems to take far longer to unlock stuff in this game compared to the Master Chief Collection. Of course, this is also a game with a premium battle pass, so if there was ever an example of a perverse monetary incentive, Exhibit A, ladies and gentlemen. For me personally, this isn't something that I'm too bothered about, as I don't tend to spend a lot of time on cosmetics for first-person shooters, and given that I don't have a lot of time to throw at multiplayer games at the best of times, I couldn't care less how quickly the arbitrary level bar increases because there's no way in hell I'll ever max it out anyway. What really matters is whether the core gameplay is worth the time investment, and from what I've played, it's really solid. It's a little too early to say how balanced the weapons are, but what stood out immediately is the fact that the basic weapons, namely the assault rifle and sidekick, are very useful right out the gate, which is good considering you only get the battle rifle as a primary in ranked mode. In contrast to my experience with the original Halo games, the assault rifle isn't just a thing you drop as soon as you can find a battle rifle or carbine, but now seems to be a proper primary weapon. If someone is at range or has lost their shields, the sidekick is a good answer, especially if you can line up a headshot, but if you're in mid or close range, the AR is a solid choice. The weapons all seem to be scattered across the map in sensible places, with good options for both close quarters combat and long-range sniper wars placed where they would be most useful. On Launchpad, you get a bulldog at your spawn point, which lets one of you stay close to the flag and shred enemies at close range with a very satisfying shotgun. And on Behemoth, you have sniper rifles for each team near the flag, which given the largely open field, gives both teams an opportunity to head each other off at the pass. Each weapon has a proper niche. Powerful weapons like the rocket launcher are publicly marked as and when they appear to ensure they don't catch you too off guard, and the sound effects and visuals make them all very satisfying to use. On a similar note, the vehicles in this game also seem pretty well balanced, with your standard Warthog, Mongoose, Ghost, and so on all making an appearance, with more powerful vehicles like the Gungoose and the Chopper being publicly dropped in later to prevent them from dominating big team battles too early. And honestly, that's probably for the best, because with how fast they move and how hard they can hit, they are a force to be reckoned with. I wouldn't have expected the Gungoose to be as strong as it is, but because they gave it explosives instead of machine guns, the one time I got a hold of it, I went on a minutes-long rampage. In part, I suspect this might be because I'm using keyboard and mouse. I don't know how strong the aim assist is for controllers in this game, and because of how often I'm using the AR, it's hard to tell how strong the bullet magnetism is, but after spending a couple of years with the franchise, I don't think aiming is the true benefit of keyboard and mouse anyway. Instead, I would argue it's the ability to turn on a dime. With a controller, I imagine you'd have some sway over how sensitive it is, but to be precise enough to line up the shot, I don't see an easy way to take less than a second to turn around if someone gets behind you, to where people find creative ways to get behind someone in return rather than turning around. With a mouse though, the ability to snap my camera in any direction without drastically affecting my movement is a major boon, as it allows me to either find targets faster or return fire sooner. This seems especially pronounced with vehicles, as in previous games the Warthog's weapons had a turn speed to keep the PC master race from being too insane with it, with movement behaving substantially differently as well. It seems that for this game that's not really in play, as everything moves so quickly and erratically that redirecting your movement and aiming is a little too easy this time. I'm not sure how exactly to balance it, since I suspect that speed was added in to account for sprint being infinite, but it could stand to be dialed down a little bit. Speaking of sprints, I'm someone who can tolerate it, but does think its introduction in Reach was a mistake. Bear in mind, this is coming from someone whose first Halo multiplayer experience was Reach, but based on that, it was very easy to spot the difference in how Reach plays versus 2 and 3. The main thing I noticed was that maps had to be more spread out to account for the greater movement range, but because of that, you also had to introduce Bloom to keep precision weapons from being too scary, which means you lower the skill ceiling overall, and suddenly you have a game that doesn't reward your time as much as 2 or 3 did. That being said, if you were going to keep sprint in for this one, this is probably the best way that it could have been implemented. You may be able to sprint indefinitely, including while you're reloading, but if you choose not to, that means you don't show up as readily on enemy radars. By doing that, they've introduced a strategic aspect to it that makes for a much more engaging experience, as now you have to choose between skulking around trying to keep the enemy from noticing you, versus covering more ground but being easier to spot. In fact, I was able to exploit this in Capture the Flag matches to get the flag a sizable distance away before the enemy team caught wind of it. Also, given the greater movement range provided by Sprint, they've gone all out in giving you more ways to move around, whether it be a small slide in one direction, grabbing onto and pulling yourself up from a ledge, or equipping a grapple hook and sending yourself flying. Hell, if ever there was a way to get me interested in the single-player campaign, it would be that grapple hook, because it allows you a lot more verticality to get above and around your opponents, and when combined with the crazy Halo physics everyone loves breaking, I can't wait to see all the creative ways that it can be used. That said, the offset from Sprint making you easier to spot on radar is negated whenever you're in a ranked match, but considering all the ranked modes are 4v4 in fairly small arenas, it's not as big of a deal there. With the core gameplay in good shape, let's talk about matchmaking and game modes. As far as the matchmaking is concerned, it seems like 343 likes taking one step forward and one step back. On one hand, they added backfills into the game, which is something I've been wanting for the Master Chief Collection ever since it released onto PC. Sure, you do have the temporary matchmaking ban for leaving a game early, but let's be honest, a minute or two is not a sufficient punishment if you're not going to include backfills as an option. And yet, here we are, with backfills actually built in right out the gate, which means that you're always able to keep a casual match going. That then means it's worth toughing it out if one or two people leave midway through, as then you know someone else will be able to jump in to close it out. But then you get to the one step back, where they lumped all of the 4v4 modes in with each other, all of the big team battle modes in with each other, and divided casual and ranked modes by primary weapon. Want to play just Slayer without much consideration for team size? Well, too bad. You get your choice of game size, and then you get to enjoy one flag CTF or whatever mode the matchmaking gods deem fit to bestow upon you. This might still be a beta, but I'm really surprised this option wasn't included for it, especially given how differently objective-based game modes play from Slayer. To be fair, they have included quite a few different variants on the objective-based game modes, whether it be standard oddball, collecting power cells that can then be stolen later, one flag and two flag CTF, and a couple variants on territories where you either capture and hold to earn points, or have to control all three at once to score 1 point. Since this is a beta, they probably wanted to give us a taste of everything they have to offer once the game officially launches next month. But if it turns out the only way we can choose our game mode is through a custom game, that's going to be an issue for the game's longevity. It's already bad enough that I've run into an occasional player that doesn't play the objective. I'd rather not have to deal with that for the game's entire lifespan. As far as those game modes are concerned, I've had a fun time with all of them. Before Halo, my main FPS multiplayer experience came from class-based FPS like Team Fortress 2, so I'm rather partial toward objective modes, especially asymmetrical ones. As a result, the constant mix-up is something that I will probably end up keeping on launch, as each one has its own neat little differences. The Power Cell game mode is a curious one where you're all trying to retrieve more power cells than another, with more spawning in once you have 5 total, which creates an interesting push and pull as each of you opt to either grab one at a time or throw a bunch of them a little closer for others to retrieve. In that regard, it seems to have been made with throwing the power cells in mind, as you can send them quite a distance and don't have to give up your sprint as a result. In contrast, the movement speed penalty for holding onto the flag in CTF games is much lower, and you can even opt to move slower to stay off the radar even while holding it. Because of that, CTF games tend to be shorter than before, as it becomes less a matter of brashly rushing toward your side of the map while periodically dropping the flag, and more a matter of stealth and surprise. For 2-flag CTF especially, it's a great change that helps to keep the game from becoming too static. And finally, for territory maps, I found myself much preferring the newer variant, where instead of holding onto 2 of the 3 points to start scoring, you instead have to capture all 3 points to score once, which then resets the points position. The former is something that I've never really liked from Halo, as it can quickly become a game of chicken where you capture a point, a bunch of you move on to capture another, and then the enemy respawns away from you and near the previous point you had captured. As a result, you end up effectively chasing each other across the map, with direct confrontations tending to be more incidental and lopsided. From what I've played so far, I'm still seeing a lot of that kind of behavior, so this will probably be a mode that I filter out on release. One mode that will definitely be staying in is the ladder variant, which still has that sense of chicken, but due to it being used for big team battle, it tends to be simultaneously more chaotic and strategic. By needing to hold on to the points, at least long enough to get the remainder, and with both teams having separate places where they spawn in, there's a lot of tension as each team desperately vies to earn the 1 point you get from capturing all 3. Thanks to that, it ended up being some of the most fun I've had with Halo multiplayer yet. So on the whole, I'm glad I decided to check this out, as it made for a fun romp that has done a lot to help the game stand out in my mind. I'm not sure as of yet whether I'll be tempted to buy a single player FPS for $60, but if I want to change a pace from the strategy games and RPGs that I normally play, this will definitely make for an easy install. And honestly, if for some reason you haven't tried it out yet, I strongly encourage you to do so, as unless you're sorely strapped for time, it's hard to say no to free, even if the cosmetics are unlocked at a snail's pace. With that said, that's all I have for this video. Thank you all for watching. Please like and share this if you find it deserving, and subscribe to this channel for more content like this posted on a semi-regular basis. It may be some time before I look at Infinite again, given that I'll probably wait for the co-op campaign to release before diving into single player, but after what I've played here, I'm definitely not overlooking this as we go into next year. For now, my focus will be on finishing up a review on the entirety of Halo the Master Chief Collection. As while I've finished discussing the gameplay portion over the course of 6 videos, I've yet to even begin discussing the story. Hell, before this open beta showed up, that's what I was going to continue working on. But at least I did make good headway on that before pivoting to this game. For now though, thank you all once again for watching, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you all later.